And wherever you're joining us from, we're really happy that you're joining us for another Bible talk. We're looking at this collection of talks called Jesus in His Own Words. A lot of thoughts out there about who Jesus is and what He was about. We're spending some time considering what He said about Himself through the Gospel of John. We continue today as we look at Jesus in John chapter 15, and we get a peek into the upper room, these final hours with Jesus and His disciples, and we get a peek through the keyhole and have a look at what He's saying to His friends with the Lord's Supper. The first Lord's Supper having just been taken moments earlier, and probably even the taste of the fruit of the vine still on the tongues of His disciples. Jesus looks in on these worried friends of His, and He says, I am the true vine. In His final night with His friends, before He was betrayed and crucified, and before even they would launch out in the weeks ahead and begin the mighty missionary movement that would take over the Mediterranean rim, He says, I am the true vine. A moment where any instruction could have been given, any download of strategy for what was ahead could have been downloaded to them. He gives them and He gives us today. John 15, specifically looking at verses 1 through 5. So we really need to consider Jesus in His own words today. Let's take a minute to block out the other voices speaking to you and hear Jesus in His own words as He speaks to us through His disciples. Let our hearts ponder these words given to these scared and anxious followers, because it's this look through the keyhole into this upper room that we actually can see the resource by which Jesus was calling His disciples out, and the resource by which we can even have abundant life today. 21st century London, abundant life is on offer. John 15, 1 through 5, I am the true vine. My Father is the gardener. Every branch that does not bear fruit, He prunes so that it will bear even more fruit. He goes on to say, remain in me, and I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. In verse 5, I am the vine, and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. He lands it with this, apart from me, brothers, you can do nothing. With all the imagery, with all the repetition, it could easily miss us. What's actually being talked about here? The vine, the fruit, the vine dresser, the branches, the pruning. Well, what's actually on offer right here is a conversation about life, abundant life, true life. And the opposite's true right here. It's a conversation about death, about a branch being connected to a vine, and yet there's no life flowing into the branch, and therefore no fruit of life to be found. So as we look at Jesus in His own words today, we're going to see three truths about life, three truths about abundant life for you today and me today. Jesus in His own words first. Jesus reveals that we have joined ourselves to counterfeit vines that lead to death. By implication, when He says, I am the true vine, He's telling them and us today that we plug our lives into false and counterfeit vines. They promise life, they promise health, they promise fulfillment for us, and yet they only lead to death. Not just physical death, obviously, but purposelessness, futility, a lack of peace. No matter the labor that you put in, no matter the effort that you put into it, these false vines lead to death. Here's the reality that Jesus reveals. Here's the big idea. You and I have become so entangled into these false and dying vines that we can't see that they're actually leading to death. We've actually been caught up in the counterfeit, and we can't see the reality. So the question for us today is, into what source are you implanting the engine of your life? For some of us, we're so entangled in the pursuit of acceptance that we actually can't see that it's leading to a futility of life. For some of us, we're so embedded in a desire to have self-autonomy, our own ability to determine our own destiny, that we can't see the peace that's lacking in our lives and the ultimate destruction that's at the end. Others, we're so into the middle of our quest for financial freedom. That's for us that would say we have little resource, and us with desire for much, much more resource. We're in the quest for financial freedom and achievement that we actually can't see. That even if we get everything we ever want, there's destruction at the end. There is no peace. There is no prosperity at the end of that. There's false vines that we could embed our life into. They promise life, and yet they lead to death. Second good truth for us today is that Jesus shows us we can abide in the true vine and have life. There are false vines, but Jesus shows us we can embed our lives into the true vine and find true and abundant life. Verses 4 and 5, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me, you will bear much fruit. Jesus is the channel through which all of God's blessing and abundant life flows to you and me. It's clear that we have a passive and active role here. Passively, we just receive the blessing and the life that Jesus gives. But actively, we must abide, remain, and stay connected to Jesus, the vine, through which that blessing and life flows. So what does this look like? Well, it's important that he leads with, I am. For those with familiarity in the Old Testament, there's a Yahwistic connection to Jesus identifying with God, the Father, who calls himself the I am to his people in the Old Testament, but it's more than that right here. Right here, he's saying, I am the true vine, so that you and I and the disciples in that moment can say, we are not. We don't have what it takes. We don't have life in ourselves, friends, today. Jesus says, I am, so that we can identify we are not. And if he is the vine, if he is the source of life and blessing, you and I aren't. I know I'm not. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, we can say all that we've been chasing, all that we've been trying to control in our own lives, it's not doing it. No amount of creativity, no amount of resourcing, no amount of hard work can produce the life and therefore the fruits of life that we see Jesus calling for in the text. We must acknowledge, Jesus, you are the true vine, and we aren't. He says, apart from me, you can do nothing. Well, Jesus, I went to work today without you. Jesus, I fed the kids this morning without you. I finished uni without you, so I'm doing some stuff. And what Jesus is saying is, apart from me, you can bear no spiritual fruit that shows for spiritual life. We can try to glue on or tack on the appearance of fruit, but it's rotten and it falls off after a few days. We can do all the moralistic good deeds to try to satisfy that voice that's telling you, you aren't measuring up. But it's like taking a thumbtack and trying to implant grapes onto the end of that grapevine. After a few days, it's rotten and it stinks and it's falling off. We need regular intimacy, relationship, and connectivity to Jesus to produce true spiritual fruit that proves the spiritual life that's coursing through us, connected to the true vine. I am the vine, he says. And the metaphor breaks down a bit here, where we're in regular vineyards. When the branch is connected to the vine, it stays there unless something crazy happens. For you and I, we must daily, moment by moment, hour by hour, day by day, reconnect and remain and stay connected and abide in Jesus, the vine. Choose daily to remain in him, or we choose daily to plug ourselves into these counterfeit vines that are slowly leading to our death. At the heart of abiding is this: a daily growing sense of our own weakness and a daily growing sense of his strength. This is life. He promises us in verse 4, remain in me as I also remain in you. As we abide in him, friends, he abides in us. His life courses through us, and the fruit comes to show that life. Third and final beautiful truth here: the Father desires that the failing and the fruitful be driven to Jesus. There's two different types of folks tuning in today. There's those of us who've tried to embed our lives into the branches that are counterfeit. They look like they're going to lead to life, but they ultimately lead to death. We have failed to find life in these branches. And then there's those of us who've chosen to plug ourselves into Christ, the one who says he's the true vine, the true source of God's blessings and abundant life. And we've seen some measure of spiritual fruit from it. We have the failing, and we have the fruitful to some measure. And for both categories today, here's the news. It's good news ultimately, but it hurts. For both groups of people, the failing and the fruitful, we don't get away without pain in the text. Verse 2, he cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. That's the failing. While every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that they can be even more fruitful. Everyone's going under the knife in this text. Jesus says that God the Father is the gardener. The vine provides the power and the life, and yet the gardener's in there. He's architecting. He's moving. He's orchestrating. The Father is working to push us deeply into the vine. That's what the Father wants for you in your life today. Your abundant life in the future, pressing you deeply and securely into Jesus, the true vine. So for those who've tried other vines and you've found that they lead to death, you have failed in your pursuit for life. God desires to cut you from that lifeless vine, and it's painful, but to implant you deeply and securely in a vine, in Jesus, the true vine that will lead to life and blessing. He cuts off every branch that bears no fruit. Painful, absolutely, but the promise of life and its fruits in Jesus is there for you, friend, today. And for others who've been driven into Jesus, the true vine, you've found some measure of fruit and life in your life. The Father desires that you bear fruit all the more. All the life, the abundant life of Jesus. Fruit budding up so juicy and beautiful that there's barely any more places on your branch for it to hang. He desires that for you, friend. Yet it only comes, as we see in the text, through the pain of pruning. Every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. It's the process by which the Father looks in and these little sprigs, these little things sprouting up, he cuts them down. He files them down. He shapes them down so that later abundant fruit can come. And it's painful. It's trial, friend. It's suffering. And it's the storms of life. And yet we need to consider this. People who have experienced the most fruitfulness in this life are the ones, as we look back deep into their stories, they're also the ones who've experienced the most pain, the most suffering and extraordinary difficulty and trial. Judson, Owen, Bunyan, George Patton, missionary to the New Hebrides, losing spouses, losing children, under physical attack. Think of the former slave, George Lyle, oppressed, and yet through that pruning, a missionary to Jamaica. Do not allow that sifting, friend. Do not allow that hurting. Do not allow that storm in your life to pass and to jade you to God. It's our God's desire that your pain drive you deeply and solidly into Jesus, the true vine, and in the true vine, finding fruit and life.